Hello everyone. Today let's take a closer look at the controversial topic of blue clipping in Nikon cameras. We're going to talk about what color clipping is. What is its cause? Is blue clipping a problem unique to Nikon? How did Nikon get blamed for this? Is N-Log the culprit? Is it a fatal flaw of the camera? In order to avoid blue clipping, what should be paid attention to in the early stage of shooting? How to deal with it correctly in the post-processing for color grading in DaVinci Resolve software. How should Nikon deal with the problem of blue clipping at present? Welcome to my channel. This video is quite long. I hope to make the issue of blue clipping as clear as possible to clarify some specious statements on the internet. This video has not been sponsored by any party. It is purely personal interest. Now, let's get started. Blue clipping is a type of color clipping. A scene full of blue tones does not necessarily mean there will be blue clipping. Color clipping, or clipping in English, its literal meaning is cutting. Color clipping sometimes appears in some monochromatic light reflection phenomena called color bleeding. It might result to an unnatural transition of gradient light while low light is clipped. Here, bleeding is when an object or surface is colored by reflecting colored light from nearby surfaces. But the bleeding color is not necessarily clipped. They are not exactly the same thing. In the field of still image photography and video, the meaning of color clipping is very close to the well-known term overexposure. The so-called overexposure refers to that it will cause a bright and uniform area. This area is usually completely white, without any image detail. We know when external light particles hit the pixel, the smallest component on the camera sensor array, they are converted into a tiny amount of electric charge. The Bayer color filter film is a kind of mosaic of red, green, and blue color filters are arranged on the pixel points to form the three primary color channels of red, green, and blue. Most image sensors use this specific arrangement of color filter arrays to produce color images. Pixels can be thought of as containers for storing charge, which have a limit on the maximum amount of charge they can hold. This maximum detection signal amount of charge that each pixel can hold is called the full well capacity. If this container is compared to a measuring cup, the electric charge can be regarded as the liquid in the measuring cup. The volume of the measuring cup can be called tolerance, equivalent to full well capacity, and the fineness of the scale on the measuring cup, equivalent to the analog to digital converter, the resolution of the AD converter, that is, the number of bits of signal quantization. It is an indicator of the degree of image color detail that is also called grayscale value. Full well capacity, base noise, and the number of bits of signal quantization directly determines the camera's effective no banding phenomenon, that is, the available dynamic range value. Just as a measuring cup filled with liquid will overflow when the charge fills the pixel container, data above the maximum detection signal will be lost. At this point, we would say its highlights are fully saturated or the highlights are blown out. When a photographic image upward clipping highlights or clipping lowlights downward in some areas, any details in those areas will be lost. This loss of data in photographic images is called clipping. In the color grayscale data display of the image as shown in the waveform, this area will appear as if it was cut flat by a pair of scissors. White highlights are overexposed actually. The three primary color channels of red, green, and blue are all clipped simultaneously. If only one or two color channels are clipped, it may appear as an area of oversaturated color without detail. In the actual image, this area looks like it has been smear brushed. In addition, if it is added by other color channels, it may also appear as a distorted color area. For example, what should be a blue sky? Because the color is clipped, this area often appears greener than it should. If the blue or red channel is clipped, we don't usually say it is blue overexposure or red overexposure, but it is called blue clipping or red clipping. Here, clipping, it can refer to the overexposure of the highlight intensity of a certain color of light. That is the clipping caused by overexposure of light intensity. At the same time, it can also refer to the oversaturation of a certain color of light, that is, the chromaticity range clipping. That is to say, there is another important reason it will lead to the color clipping phenomenon. This can be called out of gamut clipping. Originally input wide color gamut data when mapped to the output narrow color gamut. That is, when performing color space transform, compression, operation, data in the color area that exceeds the target color space limit may be cut off. So, what is color gamut? What is color space? Why do we need to do color space transform or color gamut mapping? What kind of pre-stage shooting and post-processing color grading operations will lead to color clipping? What methods can be used to avoid color clipping as much as possible? Here, let's briefly introduce some necessary basic knowledge of color science. If you feel a sense of jump below, please find some professional books on color science, such as the Optics Handbook. Color space is a way of expressing color mathematically quantitatively. Refers to an objective way of describing the feeling of color in the human eye. Usually, you need to define three main colors first, that is, primary colors, then use the color superposition model to describe various colors. The CIE 1931 XYZ color space was the first attempt to create a color space based on the human eye measurement of color perception. It is the basis for almost all other color spaces. This color space was designed to contain all colors visible to the human eye. As we all know, light is an electromagnetic wave. Different colors of light have different light spectrum power distributions. The human eye has three types of light color sensors that respond differently, related to the corresponding red, green, and blue color stimulus values X, Y, and Z. The tri-stimulus values X, Y, and Z can be obtained by multiplying the light spectrum power distribution curve by the integral of the known color matching functions over the wavelength. Although the complete description of all colors visible to the naked eye is three-dimensional, but the concept of color can be divided into two parts. One is the brightness of the color, the other is the type of color and the degree of change in saturation, which is commonly known as brightness and chroma. For example, white is a bright color, while gray is considered a less bright white. In other words, white and gray have the same chroma, but different lightness. This simplifies the inconvenient 3D problem of describing color to a 2D problem of chromaticity. Here's how it's done. The CIE YXY color space is intentionally designed so that the Y parameter is a measure of the lightness or brightness of the color. The chromaticity of the color is then specified by two derived parameters X and Y, which comes from three tri-stimulus values X, Y, and Z2 of the three values normalized by the function. The color space thus derived is specified by X, Y, Y. It is called CIE. The XYY color space is widely used to describe colors in practice. Through the above relationship, the data points distributed in the 3D space of large X, Y, and Z are compressed to the 2D plane of the X plus Y plus Z equals 1 section in the 3D space of small x, Y, and Z. The description of visible light in the XY plane space is what we often call the CIE 1931 color space chromaticity diagram. For example, through the information on the internet, we can see the light spectrum power distribution curve of the blue LED, and its coordinates on the chromaticity diagram are like this. The chromaticity diagram shows all the chromaticities visible to ordinary people. This area displayed in color is called the color gamut of human vision. Therefore, the color gamut is a limited coverage area in the color space, and the color space is defined by the color mathematical model such as XYZ and the gamut. The gamut of all visible chromaticities on the CIE chromaticity diagram is a horseshoe shape displayed with color. The curved boundary of the gamut here is called the spectrum locus and corresponds to monochromatic light. The wavelength is marked in nanometers. For example, laser is a monochromatic light. The better the monochromaticity, the purer the color of the light, the higher the saturation, the closer the X and Y coordinate positions are to the edge of the spectrum track. In contrast, less saturated colors are located inside the shape, and white is located in the center. The larger the X value, the more obvious the red color. The larger the Y value, the more obvious the green color, because X plus Y plus Z equals 1. The smaller X and Y are, the larger the Z value, the more obvious the blue color. Here we introduce three commonly used color spaces based on the CIE YXY color space. One is the standard red, green, and blue color space sRGB color space. sRGB is a standard RGB color space developed by HP and Microsoft in 1996 for. The second is Rec.709, also known as BT.709 and ITU-709, which is formulated by the ITUR radio communication sector of the International Telecommunication Union as standard for image coding and signal characteristics of high-definition television. In the CIE XY color coordinate system, it is consistent with the sRGB color space. In the video file type menu of the Nikon camera, H.26510-bit MOV, select SDR tone mode, means that you accept the practice of limiting the display gamut to Rec.709. For other video file types, for example, if you select SDR tone mode under N-RAW, it means that you temporarily accept the monitoring mode of Rec.709 monitor. You may also change this tone mode setting in the color grading software. The third is Rec.2020, also known as BT.2020. Another standard for image coding and signal characteristics of ultra-high-definition television established by ITUR. Rec.2020 defines various parameters of ultra-high-definition television with standard dynamic range, SDR, and wide color gamut, WCG. The Rec.2020 color space can reproduce colors that the Rec.709 color gamut cannot display. The RGB primary colors used by Rec.2020 are equivalent to monochromatic light sources on the CIE in 1931 spectrum locus. Select N-Log tone mode under the video file type in the Nikon camera menu, which means you can get a wider color range image data within the Rec.2020 color gamut. With the above color science knowledge, we can explain the color clipping phenomenon caused by out-of-gamut clipping. Since most display devices currently only follow sRGB color space, which is the narrow color space of Rec.709. When the color filter mask on our sensor, even if we have a larger color gamut, we can perceive more colors. If the display at hand only follows Rec.709, we have to face the problem of only being able to display fewer colors. A simple way is to sacrifice all the color details outside the Rec.709 color gamut. Replace them all with colors at the Rec.709 boundary. Therefore, the color clipping caused by out-of-gamut clipping is formed. So, what kind of situation are we talking about here? What about color details outside the Rec.709 color space? We can imagine a blue LED light source. Its monochromaticity is very good. That is, the blue saturation is very high in the area it illuminates, mixed with other colors of light with different brightness details, or even white light. This will result in a non-uniform distribution of saturation details in the blended area. If this part of the color exceeds the Rec.709 color gamut, that is what we refer to as color details outside the Rec.709 color gamut. In order to better express these color details, rather than sacrificing them directly, we can use some techniques and algorithms to make the human eye feel that these color details still exist. For example, for colors outside the target gamut, there is an algorithm that specifies a mapping standard, which is used to find the point to which a given original color gamut is mapped on the target gamut. The most common one is the well-known lookup table, commonly known as the LUT restoration method. Data lookup methods are also often used in color gamut mapping algorithms. Here, mapping refers to the relationship between the sets of two elements, i.e. the color gamut. Also, various color gamut compression algorithms are used. These algorithms distribute all the colors in the original color gamut differently within the entire target color gamut. It's like moving the crowd at the door of a subway car together to the middle space. Gamut mapping can be described as a constrained optimization problem. The goal is to find a mapped image that represents the original image as best as possible. That is, we hope to minimize the perceptual difference between the target mapped image and the original image under the constraint of the gamut restriction. In DaVinci Resolve, color space transform operations include color gamut mapping operations. When mapping color gamut, the accuracy of hue is prioritized, sacrificing brightness or saturation. So far, we don't seem to have anything to do with Nikon yet. If you search on YouTube with the keyword blue clipping, you will get multiple videos with similar titles as the following. Blue highlight clipping on Sony camera issue solved. that were uploaded as early as 8 years ago. This seems to indicate that Sony, the leader in video cameras, had ever fallen into a trap. The latecomer Nikon seems to have not been able to escape. Let's review the history of Nikon's mirrorless camera launches. In August 2018, Nikon released the first generation of mirrorless camera Z7 with 8-bit H.264/MPEG for video encoding 4K 30p ultra-high-definition internal recording function. Then after the launch of Z6 the following year, the addition of video output via HDMI 10-bit N-Log external recording function. 2 years later, in October 2020, after the second generation Z6 II and Z7 II were launched, 12-bit video raw file output was added on a voluntary self-paid basis. Due to the need for an external recorder, these features are only experienced by a few people. N-Log's blue clipping problem. With the early use of N-Log, it became known among some people. At that time, few people knew about the 10-bit N-Log color grading technology. Most people only knew to use Nikon's official LUT. A few people or only used one node from Rec. 2020 Nikon N-Log to Rec. 709 color space transform is performed directly. Some people don't even use nodes. In the camera raw settings of N-RAW clips directly perform Rec. 709 color space transform. Sure enough, for the blue LED lighting environment, it is easy to cause blue clipping. During this period, compared to the blue clipping problem, regarding Nikon's mirrorless cameras, people talk more about Nikon's poor human eye recognition and focus. Until the launch of the third-generation mirrorless camera flagship Z9 in October 2021, Nikon's human eye recognition and focus tracking technology has entered the first echelon. Although the Z9 has amazing 8K 60p and N-RAW video performance, but after applying Nikon's official LUT at the time, it is still easy to blue clipping. Nikon doesn't seem to care about blue clipping. At that time, it even directly launched an official promotional video full of blue tones. It seems to tell users, look, this blue is good. Less than 2 years later, Z9's lightweight version, Z8, debuted in May 2023. The rumors of blue clipping have not subsided. People found that the second version of LUT released by Z9 is exactly the same as the new LUT of Z8. Nikon USA released an official video tutorial until April 16, 2024 on color space transform between N-RAW and N-Log color grading. How to color grade Nikon N-RAW with N-Log and DaVinci Resolve. With the recent launch of Z6 III, the saying of blue clipping has become very popular. Is Z6 III experiencing a reversion to its ancestors? So I started to collect some relevant information. I found that few people have elaborated on the details of the blue clipping of Z6 III. Here I recommend the video tutorial on color space transform between N-RAW and N-Log color grading released by Nikon USA in April this year. The following is a brief introduction to the correct method of restoring the N-Log color mode in the DaVinci Resolve software. At least by using of the 3 generations of Nikon cameras, Z7, Z6 II, and Z8, blue clipping is not a prominent problem. We know that there are 3 ways to restore the log tone mode video in the DaVinci Resolve. The first is the lookup table LUT restoration method, since there are usually only dozens of LUT data points in one RGB color channel. What about a 10-bit video? Each RGB channel contains 1024 different types of data. A total of more than 1024 times 1024 times 1024 is approximately equal to more than 1 billion. Variations to correspond to so much color data can only be interpolated, so the accuracy is very limited. Therefore, some people have proposed that LUT is outdated. However, LUT is still useful for general monitoring or as a tool for personalized color tone style change. The second is DaVinci Resolve Color Management, referred to as RCM. It is a simple method for project-based color grading to restore the color. By correctly setting the parameters such as the input and output color gamut, it will automatically complete the color restoration of log file. The third is color space transform, referred to as CST. Its effect is similar to RCM, but it is more flexible. When the LUT method is not enough, it is a more accurate and detailed method of restoring color. It mainly uses a first color gamut expansion node, the middle free color adjustment node, and the final color gamut compression node, this standard process to complete the color restoration of log file. For details, please refer to the relevant video program. It should be pointed out here, it is not possible to directly convert Rec. 2020 N-Log to Rec. 709 Gamma 2.4 using only one color space transform node. It may be because the DaVinci Resolve software has not established an effective compression algorithm between the two color spaces and must be completed through the intermediate link of DaVinci Wide Color Gamut. I am using here Nikon's first generation Z7, the second generation Z6 II, and the third generation Z8 for scenes that are deliberately designed to be prone to color clipping indoors, show the effects of LUT restoration and color space transform respectively for your judgment. We can see that for most scenes that are not overexposed, the color space transform method can basically give satisfactory results. For overexposed scenes, artifacts will appear. A YouTuber named Sydney Baker Green, to my knowledge, is the only person who talked about Nikon's blue clipping in detail. He compared the same scene with the Z8 and Z9's built-in N-RAW and ProRes RAW data, and found that ProRes RAW had almost no artifacts. Therefore, I think there is no problem with Nikon's in-camera data collection. The problem lies in the processing of N-RAW in DaVinci Resolve software. I also did an extended experiment using his method. Indeed, ProRes RAW has very few blue artifacts, but the red artifacts are more than N-RAW. In addition, in the Blackmagic RAW experiment of Z6 II, check the option box of color gamut compression in software, the effect is significantly improved. Therefore, I think it may be in the DaVinci Resolve software, there are some problems with the color gamut compression in the N-RAW color space. Transform algorithm. Due to limited time, I will not go into details. We know the cause of blue clipping. We can pay full attention to the early shooting and post-processing color grading. It is highly likely that blue clipping can be avoided. In the early shooting, try to use N-RAW to shoot. Leave the most room for adjustment in the later stage. Secondly, we need to choose the subject reasonably. Confirm whether the subject is the blue bridge in the distance or the blue lighting, or the person or vehicle in front of you. Confirm through the zebra pattern in the camera. Do not overexpose the subject. For subjects with high blue saturation, it is best to appropriately lower the exposure. In addition, the color temperature of the white balance should be appropriately selected. Under normal lighting, a color temperature that is too low can easily cause the subject to be overexposed. Under strong lighting with pure monochromatic highlights, a color temperature that is too high can easily cause the subject, especially skin color, gradation of color bleeding transitions to be abrupt and oversaturated. For post-color grading, don't be too nervous when you see the smear blue in original log compression file. After the correct LUT, or RCM and color space transform, the situation will be greatly improved. In addition to the correct use of color restoration methods, that is, through a first color gamut expansion node, add the middle link of DaVinci Wide Color Gamut, and a final color gamut compression node. This standard process complete the color restoration of log file. You can also adjust the exposure appropriately. You can even try fine-tuning the gamut mapping parameters of the gamut compression node. If you choose the color science and gamut definition of your favorite brand, convert the color space, that's fine, as long as you are happy. There's a lot of subjective will in color expression. In terms of color tone style, some people like this, some people like that, but don't go too far. Next, let's talk about two statements that are easily misunderstanding. The first statement is, N-Log is the culprit of blue clipping. The problem will be solved when Nikon N-Log 2 comes out. Don't shoot N-Log when you encounter saturated blue light at present. Use SDR tone mode and it will be fine. Before discussing this issue, we must make it clear what N-Log is. The term N-Log is a combination of N, Nikon, and log. Log is the expression of the logarithmic function. The logarithmic function is often used in cameras to perform nonlinear digitization of the grayscale of light, thereby achieving an effect similar to human perception of light and dark. Under the same hardware conditions, grayscale log nonlinear processing has a higher dynamic range than linear grayscale. There are two places where N-Log is used in Nikon cameras. One refers to the third generation and later products, N-RAW 12-bit NEV, ProRes RAW HQ 12-bit MOV, ProRes 422 HQ 10 bits MOV, or H.265 10 bits MOV. N-Log tone mode option in video image formats such as for high dynamic range shooting. It is the reverse option relative to the SDR normal tone mode. For products before the second generation, there is no tone mode option in the external recording video format. N-Log tone mode is used by default. The second is specifically referring to the 10-bit N-Log short film recorded externally in products before the second generation. It is a shorthand term as a term RAW for the original image format Blackmagic RAW and ProRes RAW short film. Now this term seems to have been replaced by the first term mentioned above. So now if we want to mention N-Log, usually refers to the N-Log tone mode. At the same time, we must also indicate that it is the original image file format N-RAW 12 bits, ProRes RAW HQ 12 bits, or the video compression file format H.265 10 bits in recording. N-RAW is linear 12-bit data. Theoretically, if you want to perform log nonlinear compression processing on the linear 12-bit grayscale, it can be achieved with 10 bits. On the other hand, H.265 10-bit in N-Log tone mode may achieve the effect of linear 12-bit data. According to Nikon, N-Log is optimized for 10-bit video recording a tone compression mode with 12 stops of dynamic range. Those who say N-Log is the culprit of blue clipping, one opinion is that the problem with N-Log is that the curve is too bad, affects the dynamic range. That is to say, 12 stops of dynamic range is not enough. If there is N-Log 2, increased to 14 or 16 stops of dynamic range, the original 12 stops of highlights are clipped, increased to 14 stops, and they will not be clipped. We are not discussing whether it is possible to use linear 12-bit raw data to achieve a dynamic range of 14 or 16 stops, nor will we discuss whether insufficient highlight grayscale quantization data will lead to banding. There are many scenes with high light ratios in nature. A 16-stop dynamic range will also result in highlight clipping. So, up to how many stops of highlight clipping it is not considered clipping? Take Nikon Z7 photo as an example. Its dynamic range of still image is considered to be very good. There is a test report from a well-known website. It is said to reach 14 stops. Unlike the 12-bit N-RAW of movies, the color depth of a single still image RAW can reach 14 bits. Even so, as mentioned above, it may overexposure. The sky blue clipping phenomenon will still occur. When photographers shoot against the sun, or avoid shooting directly at the sun, or find ways to make the sun's starburst look better, humans are far from being able to do this. It not only makes the foreground, such as trees in front of you, clearly visible, but also accurately reproduces the details of the sunspots inside the sun. Almost no one will take a photo containing the midday sun. Say that a certain camera brand has the disadvantage of white clipping. Obviously, the claim that the blue clipping problem will be solved after Nikon N-Log 2 comes out is untenable. You can say that blue clipping is related to dynamic range. Nikon's video shooting dynamic range is poor, compared with some of the competitors' cameras. The same scene is more likely to cause overexposure or clipping. This is all okay. But if you insist, if increasing the dynamic range by a few stops can completely solve the blue clipping problem, that's a nonsense. What's more, blue clipping is not only related to overexposure, but also related to the fact that most display devices only follow sRGB color space, that is, Rec. .709 color space. Another opinion is that the N-Log color restoration LUT is not designed well. If you don't use N-Log, you don't need Nikon's terrible LUT. As we mentioned earlier, the LUT restoration accuracy has its limitations. The purpose of using N-Log is to take advantage of its 12-stop dynamic range. If N-Log is not used, the dynamic range of the highlight part will be lower. Wouldn't it be more criticized by those who hold the former opinion? Besides, N-Log's color restoration has other methods besides the LUT method. There are also better color space transform and RCM methods. N-Log itself is not the direct cause of blue clipping. There are bright lights in dark scenes, and the light ratio, is generally large. So in this case, it is the right choice to use N-Log as much as possible. In fact, blue clipping also exists in SDR color mode. It's just that most cameras are more careful in processing it in the machine. It won't appear easily, or the user himself doesn't pay much attention to it. As mentioned before, under the premise of proper exposure, in addition to the LUT restoration method, the correct color space transform method in the later stage can basically solve the blue clipping problem. The second statement is that Nikon's blue clipping problem is more because the color gamut of the N-Log tone mode in Nikon N-RAW is limited to Rec. 2020. The essence of this opinion is that the blue clipping is Nikon's machine records blue data that exceeds the range of Rec. 2020 and does not limit it. If Nikon designs a set of its own N gamut, it can solve this problem. The reason is that the color gamut definition Rec. 2020 in N-Log is too small. CMOS's response to blue exceeds Rec. 2020, resulting in the data being clipped when it is stored. Some people even think that N-RAW is a fake RAW. That is, the demisacing and Bayer removal have been performed before the machine recording. This results in that no matter what transform is performed in the later stage, the color space is essentially limited to Rec. 2020 in the early stage. The person who mentioned this problem obviously noticed the origin of the blue clipping problem. In addition to highlight clipping, there is also the important aspect of limited color gamut. The Rec. 2020 color gamut is a wide color gamut defined by a triangle composed of red, green, and blue monochromatic light. However, even if the CMOS currently used by Nikon is as they speculated, the response to blue exceeds Rec. 2020, they still exaggerated the clipping outside the Rec. 2020 color gamut and did not realize or deliberately avoid saying more clipping occurs between Rec. 2020 and Rec. 709. Almost all current discussions about blue clipping are based on the premise that the display device complies with Rec. 709, including Nikon's LUT, which is clearly stated to be used for Rec. 709. Not many people actually have monitors that strictly follow Rec. 2020, and not many people can see blue clipping outside the Rec. 2020 color gamut on a true Rec. 2020 monitor. If someone says they have seen it, more than 80% of them are watching it with data compressed to Rec. 709. Although we know very little about N-RAW, but the description of the video file type in Nikon's official data has pointed out N-RAW is raw data without Bayer decoding. There is currently no reason to believe that N-RAW needs to be. Additionally, color gamut compression and Bayer decoding, the so-called color gamut definition Rec. 2020 in N-Log only refers to Nikon claims color gamut that after debayer in H.26510-bit MOV video files. Most video equipment manufacturers have their own wide color gamut. I think that's because these manufacturers each have their own color science, which is convenient for color gamut mapping and color unification of their own multiple products. I believe that when Nikon needs it, it's not surprising to come up with an N gamut. For H.26510-bit MOV direct output video files, I hope that Nikon's in-camera color transform will be better in the future. Although it is very unusual for people to be able to use monitors that strictly follow Rec. 2020 as the color gamut limitation of N-RAW, we think it should only depend on the filter film on the CMOS. That's why we can change the tone mode setting of N-RAW in DaVinci Resolve software. Of course, it is puzzling why the DaVinci Resolve software manufacturer limited the tone mode setting of N-RAW to Rec. 2020. While its own Blackmagic RAW has very few restrictions. This may be one of the reasons for the above speculation that N-RAW is limited in color space before debayer. Obviously, if we really want to find the culprit of blue clipping outside the Rec. 2020 color gamut, CMOS suppliers and color grading software manufacturers are not free from responsibility. In short, too many people who mention this issue are speculating without data. With limited official information from Nikon, for this, just listen to it and forget about it. Now let's summarize. Through the above examples and explanations, we have been able to understand that the cause of the blue clipping problem is: first, the highlight clipping in the early or late stage. Second, the color expression limitations of the Rec. 709 color space. Clipping can happen on any video or photo camera. Here are examples for an iPhone 15 Pro Max and an older Sony Xperia phone. Cameras from different camera manufacturers may have various differences in performance and functions. We believe that based on the current technical level of camera manufacturers, the performance differences of hardware of the same level are already very close. Besides, the correlation between blue clipping and the camera's hardware parameter indicators is not prominent. What's more important is the brains behind the camera in the early and late stages and the support of the color grading software manufacturers for the built-in functions of a certain camera brand. So blue clipping is not a fatal flaw of the camera. Don't mind it too much when purchasing. However, the slightly related video dynamic range is indeed a camera parameter indicator worthy of attention. The point of this video is if we can correctly treat blue clipping like in daily photography, correctly treat the problem of overexposure, the impact of blue clipping on the actual use of the camera is very limited. By using effective color space transform methods, color clipping can be avoided or reduced. However, this sometimes results in a reduction in overall color saturation, which can make colors appear darker. In some cases, the need for bright, saturated colors may outweigh the need for clipping in a single channel due to exceeding the specified color gamut. In these cases, we have to tolerate some minor color clipping or artifacts that are not important. The reason why many people think that Nikon cameras are prone to blue clipping is related to the lack of public information and data provided by Nikon. It did not provide users with a standard workflow in a timely manner. At the same time, the LUT that Nikon hastily launched in the early days was not accurate enough. So it is not unfair to take the blame. However, when we understand that the LUT method has limitations, and the more appropriate method is to use the color space transform algorithm of the color grading software to complete the principle of N-Log color restoration. At this time, if you still find that the result is not satisfactory, for example, it is easy to appear when the blue highlight clipping artifacts and the unnatural color bleeding transition. Nikon should be blamed for this alone? As consumers, we know that the criticism of product deficiencies by all parties helps to spur manufacturers to improve their products. But regarding the more complicated issue of blue clipping, what should Nikon do next? First of all, I hope Nikon can publish a white paper on N-RAW to let everyone truly understand the principle of N-Log color restoration and give some tips on how to avoid problems such as blue clipping and unnatural light bleeding, which have received a lot of attention. Secondly, I hope Nikon will also improve similar shooting assistance functions in the in-camera firmware. It is said that the adaptive matrix launched by other companies can be based on the preset display standard. Identify the area in the picture that exceeds the preset color gamut. Reduce the brightness and color saturation of the target area, thereby achieving the purpose of repairing the color clipping of the picture and restoring the details of the picture. Perhaps Nikon already has a similar algorithm, but it just hasn't promoted it, or it is worried about poor color restoration affecting other normal scene shooting, so it has not been adopted. Anyway, few of us expect Nikon to use the in-camera algorithm to completely replace the algorithm of DaVinci Resolve software in the computer. Again, I hope Nikon will strengthen its technical cooperation with DaVinci Resolve software manufacturers to improve its own color science system. In the internal settings of DaVinci Resolve software, at least it can obtain the status that the big three deserves. For example, it comes with LUT curve without extra download process. There is an N-gamut option when converting color space, overcoming the problem of artifacts and unnatural color bleeding transition, etc. Going further, I hope Nikon can improve or unlock hardware performance to increase dynamic range. For example, use 16-bit linear N-RAW or make a 12-bit nonlinear N-RAW that everyone originally expected. Under this premise, it may be more practical to release N-Log 2 that matches this grayscale quantization feature. After finish of this video, on September 12, 2024, Nikon officially launched the 2.0 version of LUT for all cameras with 5 styles supervised by RED. Please pay attention to the subsequent video for details on the improvement of blue clip. Thank you for watching. Welcome to subscribe to this channel.